in connection to the UN summit, I want to talk about the latest developments in international climate policy. And I want to use a contrast between two countries. And those are, my own country, Germany, and the largest emitter of CO2 right now, which is the People's Republic of China. So Germany's government just last week revealed its latest climate policy plan. So we talked about before how Germany is failing its 2020 goals for decreasing CO2 emissions. This will not be achieved. This is not achievable at this point. But they decided that they want to double down and increase their effort and become a quote-unquote leader in climate policy again. And so the midterm goal is 55% reduction of CO2 emissions by the year 2030 compared to the 1990 level. And, we talked about how this 1990 level is already cheating as a starting point because the Eastern German economy, of course, collapsed starting in the 1990s. Or the heavy industry from the, Soviet occupation collapsed back then. So this is sort of the starting point that Germany likes to choose because it's easier to achieve. So what's in the package by the German government? It's about $60 billion of what Bernie Sanders would call investments. Some prominent measures are taxation of CO2 emissions in the transportation and heating sector, which starts with about 10 euros, which is around about $11 right now per ton of CO2 in 2021. Subsidies of electric cars, of course, which is always in this kind of policy. Then a ban of oil heating, which is very relevant. Of course, Germany can experience very cold winters in many regions, and oil heating is still a thing here. And taxes on flight tickets. Also, a cap on solar subsidies that was earlier introduced to stop the escalation of electricity prices will be removed. And I think we can assume that consumer electricity prices in Germany will continue to go up, although they are already at the top of the European Union. And I also think that the heavy-handed central planning style of this approach will be really hard on the citizenry and industry. So, the German government is particularly choosing technologies. It's not just saying, we want CO2 reduced and we will put some sort of incentive or cap and trade in place. They are just saying, we want you to use electric vehicles and not internal combustion engines. And we want, solar and wind as power generators and not coal or gas and this kind of thing. And so obviously, this has been already criticized by the Greens for its lack of ambition. They always want it faster. They always want the coal phase out faster and so on. And to put things in perspective, Germany right now as a whole emits about 2.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions compared to China 30 and America's about 15%. Now contrast this with China's climate policy and hat tip to our friends at the Institute for Energy Research here for bringing this news item. And the data comes from a Columbia University report, which is a guide to Chinese climate policy. And this is an annual reporting by them. And they find mixed trend in the Chinese climate policy. I think that's an understatement here. So some of the findings is that while China is leading the world in renewable capacity additions, they always use the total. China is a huge country and a huge producer of solar panels and other parts for renewable technology, of course. They also added 30 gigawatts of domestic coal capacity in 2018. And they are also leading the financing of new coal projects in other countries. And China's emissions in 2018 actually went up 2.5%, which is the highest increase in the recent 5 years. So instead of making good on some promises of slowing down or doing something for the Paris climate goals, they are actually increasing their emissions because they are still in a growth phase. And we know why. We talked about this several times here. So China is one of the countries where literally hundreds of millions of people are still waiting to consume as much energy per capita as the average American or German. And so they have a lot of growth to do, and they can't just build a bunch of solar panels and wind turbines and get the job done. So their trend is increasing the absolute amount of fossil fuels burned. And so as a comparison here, Germany right now has about 45 gigawatts of coal capacity still on the grid. And China in 2018 added 30 gigawatts plus something financed abroad. So in 1 year, China is essentially adding as much capacity as Germany plans to retire until the late 2030s. This is, and one has to marvel, why do activists and policymakers focus so much on, creating a really tough policy to curb emissions where it makes no sense and where it makes no difference long term? So the only thing that matters right now is, finding some technology. If you want to reduce CO2 emissions, I don't want that, but if that's the goal, you shouldn't do it in domestic policy in Germany. This is super hard. This is crippling the economy of the first mover, and this is not changing the trajectory of Chinese energy policy. So if you want to do something, you need to provide the Chinese rural population, which is still in poverty, with some economically viable alternative. And it's really a stark contrast if you just think about how quickly China and then India, maybe 1 billion or 2 billion people of future emitters are still waiting to get remotely the energy consumption that we enjoy. This is really, it's nonsense. The domestic policy in Germany is irrelevant, and we can't even achieve that weak goal, as you said in your first story. This is a super weak goal, and we can't achieve that. It's super tough. But think about how to provide all the energy that future Chinese and Indian populations require.
I mean, one of the things, and I'm going to talk more about this in a few minutes, that I think is just really important to stress is it's not simply that the catastrophists have said, like, we have to have these expensive, restrictive ways of reducing CO2 emissions because there's no other technological or adaptation solution that'll do it. It's that they're actively oppose anything that would address this issue, any sort of technology that would affordably capture carbon, any form of making nuclear more affordable and therefore scalable, any form of geoengineering that could potentially, at a low cost, allow us to keep temperatures under control. Like anything that would not involve more dictatorial power in the hands of governments is viewed as not just not a current possibility, but as something that we should be actively opposing and not looking at and restricting. And I mean, and so I think you get really clearly, okay, why would they be so focused on these plans in Germany that aren't going to solve any problem? And why would they be opposed to anything that would solve the problem while maintaining freedom and increasing affordable energy? Well, it's because that would take away their very goal, which is that it's to have greater power and use that power to restrict people's ability to produce and above all to produce and consume lots of energy.